Hi, I'm Tim Cook, and this is video 4 of the training on business planning in West African marine protected areas, organized by le Réseau des aires marines protégées d'Afrique de l'Ouest, and delivered by Baastel Consulting Group and BlueSeeds. In the previous video, we learned how to calculate the financing gap of our MPA. Here, we will explore some means to close this gap by reducing costs or reviewing revenues. Okay, so we've seen during the first part of this training session how building a financial strategy is an iterative process, meaning that the strategy is constantly revised until the financing gap is zero. And remember this figure, which begins with your management plan and details the 7 steps which are necessary to balance your financial strategy and ensure that your financial gap is close to zero. Well, we've already detailed the 4 first steps of this roadmap, and we're now going to explore the 5th step, which is how to reduce costs. So you've currently worked on your business plan, meaning that with your management plan, you've been able to assess by studying your costs and your revenues, you've been able to assess your financing gap. And so if your financing gap is positive, meaning you have a financing gap, the question is now, how do you reduce it? Well, the easiest way to reduce a positive financing gap is to reduce your costs. So reducing costs is naturally the first and easiest option for reducing a financing gap, and this reduction builds on cost-effectiveness strategies. It is possible to reduce costs without jeopardizing the conservation objectives of your MPA. One way of doing this is to think every expense twice. Investments, for example. Is this investment necessary? Do we really need this new visitor center? It is possible to also reduce operational costs by sharing equipment for different activities. For example, boat sharing for monitoring and patrolling. This will save fuel. It is also possible to reduce expenses on human resources by optimizing the activities of the staff. So, for example, before considering the recruitment of a new staff, ensure that all your employees have well-defined job descriptions and, more important, a full-time occupation over the year. Optimizing human resources is never an easy task, and nobody's talking about letting people go here. However, it is important to try to rationalize the activities of staff. And an example in this respect is the management decisions taken in the Archipelago de Cabrera MPA in Spain, where management identified 67 different tasks and reported the description and duration of each one of those activities into an Excel tool. And the results from this tool were used to organize staff according to time required for each activity and to provide this staff with an accurate description of activities for a more efficient management of this MPA. Another way for an MPA to reduce its cost is to develop strategic partnerships. For example, scientific partnerships with a university. A partnership with a university or a research institute will allow scientists to conduct research inside the MPA in exchange for researchers sharing their data and results with the MPA itself. It is possible to enhance regional cooperation where results and efforts can be shared and distributed across a network of MPAs. And finally, citizen science can bring data collected freely by volunteers. In this regard, marine protected areas typically require large amounts of ecological data to be implemented and adaptively managed. So citizen science programs can help provide these much needed data. There are many examples of citizen science nowadays, mainly in the terrestrial environment, but these are developing in the ocean environment, and there are already some examples of fish monitoring with volunteer divers or seabird monitoring with volunteer birders. However, even after you've tried to reduce your costs, even after you've optimized your human resources and rethought your investments, for example, well, your financing gap might still be positive. Now, in this case, before you start searching for new revenues, you might want to consider to analyze your existing funding sources and try to develop a strategy to secure and increase these streams of revenues which you already have. The shortage of funding for MPAs often leads managers to search for new revenue sources beyond those conventional ones they already have, but a strategy that focuses only on new revenue generation is not likely to be sustainable in the long run. And before looking for new financial opportunities, you might need to examine the already existing opportunities that could perhaps be optimized or developed further. Before you rethink your revenues, you need to review what those revenues are, what their different contributions are to your revenue budget. And in this respect, the business plan tool, if you remember in video 3, produces an output which describes the proportion of the different types of revenues to your revenue budget. So by reviewing those different contributions, you're able to have a good estimate of which type of revenue, governmental, private, self-generated, NGO, or donor, is contributing the most to your revenue budget. Now that you've identified your different revenues, it's time to rethink them. Can I increase these revenues, and how? Let's take a few examples. Let's say you have revenues from the government. In order to increase these revenues, you will have to justify and advocate for the needs and benefits of your MPA. In this respect, the financial strategy you are developing and the business plan associated to it that you've calculated here are particularly helpful. A long-term financial strategy coupled with specific environmental objectives, as well as the demonstrated benefits of past activities, if you have any, can be powerful advocacy tools. Let's take another example. Funds from donors and NGOs. These are usually allocated for specific projects inside MPAs, so this leads to varying revenues. So most internationally funded or NGO funded projects don't have follow-up when they're finished, so you would want to allocate these funds in priority to short-term projects rather than counting on them over the long term. A last example, self-generated revenues. In order to increase your self-generated revenues, like visitor fees, for example, it's important to first look at increasing the price levels rather than the volume of activities in order to maximize your margins. Indeed, studies have shown that price is not the first criteria of purchase in most cases. It's also important to be transparent when you increase a price. Price rise in self-generated revenues should be justified, and the arguments for this rise should be robust in order to not discourage potential customers. Thanks for your attention. So we've seen that even before we start considering searching for new sources of income, there are some ways to rethink our expenditures and our revenues in order to reduce the financing gap of our MPA. This might not be sufficient, however, and in the following video we will explore how to proceed when considering choosing a new financing mechanism. See you soon.